Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for being here. Go ahead. Let's get that chat warmed up. Why don't you drop where you are viewing from, where you are joining us from? Drop that city, drop that state. Feel free to drop your name. We want to know who's joining us. While you're doing that, happy Father's Day to all the fathers joining us. Hope yesterday was special. Happy Men's Health Month. Happy Pride. Happy almost Juneteenth. And thank you in advance for joining us for our 3-night countdown as we are centering Black men and Black boys, young adult mental health. This is night 1 of our 3-night workshop series where we will center the mental health of Black men and Black boys, our lived experience, our silence, our strength in the space that we deserve to feel, heal, and be heard. Before we begin, I do want to offer something important. I cannot promise that this conversation or the next 3 nights are going to fix everything that you are carrying. I don't have a magic wand for all the answers. I'm not a mental health professional. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background in a second. I am someone who's committed to standing in the gap between stigma and support, between silence and expression, between survival and healing. So the goal tonight is simple. We want to spark something. We want to light a flame that encourages you to keep showing up for your own mental health and for the mental health of the people you love with the same consistency and care that you show up for everyone else. So this is a brave space. Shout out to you for taking a step and even being here tonight. This is a real space. It's a space for a community. So I'm really excited to dive in. I'm excited to share together. A little bit about me. So my name is Tyrrell Jefferies. I am the Director of K-12 Initiatives here at Active Minds. In my second year with Active Minds, time flies. I'll tell you a little bit more about our organization in just a moment. But as a Director of K-12, I get to really oversee our programmatic efforts in middle schools and high schools across the country. Prior to joining Active Minds, I was an educator. Live on the south side of Chicago and worked as a teacher and principal for over 10 years here on the south side. So education is at the center of my heart. Young Black men are at the center of my heart. And now as a mental health advocate, I've been on a personal journey around prioritizing my mental health over the last 2 years. So I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm excited to share a little bit more about you. So tell you just a little bit about Active Minds, and if you continue to join us over the next 3 nights, you'll learn more. But Active Minds is the largest nonprofit in the United States, mobilizing youth and young adults to transform mental health norms across society. For over 20 years, we've equipped the next generation of peer mental health advocates through a variety of programs, including our Active Minds chapters, including Ask, including our Sin Science Packet exhibit. Our advocacy initiatives and campaigns foster lasting change in how youth view and discuss mental health, really encouraging them to use their voices to influence broader conversations and inform mental health support within their communities. Together, you being here, we're building a diverse movement of champions committed to improving mental health for all. And I'm so excited to center Black men, Black young adults, Black boys tonight. And let me, let it be known right away, you won't have to hear my voice all this evening. I'm going to be joined by Charles Ellis. Charles is 22 years old and originally from Columbus, Ohio. He's a recent graduate of Miami University of Ohio. So drop some love in the chat for Charles. Just received that degree. Drop some love in the chat for other graduates. If you're a graduate, shout yourself out. If you're a parent of a graduate, whether it's kindergarten, whether it's college, or whether it's doctorate, go ahead and put some love in the chat. So receiving his bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering and pre-medical studies. Very, very smart young man. In his free time, he loves to play piano, dance, learn languages, and go on hikes. Charles is very passionate about destigmatizing mental health illnesses and served as the co-president of his Miami University's chapter of Active Minds. Charles has been one of my many partners in crime as we've been crafting these workshops, doing research, and really making sure we were intentional about what we put in front of you tonight. So Charles, first, just say hello to the people.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here tonight and to move this conversation along.
Charles, how are you feeling? I mean, I'm on the spot like you just for a moment. You just received that degree. How are you feeling about what's next?
Pretty good. I'm really excited about what's next to come. I know a lot of people who just graduated or maybe who are entering their senior year probably feel the same way right now, but yeah, a lot of exciting things to come.
Very, very, very proud of you. And just a little preview in night three, we'll spend a little time talking with Brandon Bond a little bit about that transition from high school to college and really the mental fortitude that you need in order to be successful in the higher ed space. So again, shout out to you, Charles. Shout out to all the other graduates who are joining us tonight. With that, Charles, I'm gonna throw it to you to go over our objectives.
Okay, everyone. Yeah, we're going over our objectives. So, first and foremost, we want to explore how generational and cultural norms shape mental health beliefs in the Black community, and also examine historical influences on trust and access to mental health care. We also want to identify how stigma and emotional suppression impact Black men and boys, and define emotional or emotion fluency, and reflect on how to foster open dialogue across generations. And if you're not familiar with what emotion fluency is yet, I also wasn't before doing research on this topic, so it's really exciting that we'll have the opportunity to share that with you all today, and hopefully something you can take with you. And by the end of the session, we hope you will have a deeper understanding of how different generations perceive mental health, the historical events that have influenced these perceptions, and the factors that contribute to ongoing stigmas today. More importantly, we hope that this new knowledge and understanding will motivate you and support you as you have conversations with those who may be from a different generation or with different people on your campus, whether it's faculty, other students, maybe if you are working in that high school or middle school environment, talking to that generation. And we may not have all the same generational lens, but we all have mental health at the end of the day, which is why we're having this conversation right now. So moving along, we're going to do a little bit of a warm up. And I want you all to continue to use the chat. I see everyone showing some love. So I appreciate you all for engaging. It's really helpful. So we'll start with our first question. What's one word or phrase you were taught to use or avoid when talking about your feelings growing up? And what impact did that have on you? And just feel free to drop it in the chat. I know one thing for me, at least, was like to be tough. That was always something that, when I was like 7, 8, like really young, that I would just hear if I was ever, not even if I was going through something, but, just kind of repeated, like be tough through these situations. But I think as we get older, we realize that emotions can be more complex than that. And that sometimes being tough can look different than avoiding emotions. So, yeah. Let me see what we have in the chat here. So I see restraints, anger, like learning to avoid anger.
Mm.
Definitely see that a lot. Be a strong Black woman. I feel like that word strong, we hear a lot in the Black community, like be strong. And I think it's important to recognize we are strong, but we also have to recognize, times where looking strong just looks different and how you can keep yourself strong by maybe doing something that doesn't look like what we had previously thought what being strong was. I see weakness made me afraid to, sorry, to feel my feelings and express them. That one is definitely real. Don't cry. I see multiple people putting don't cry. Guys, don't cry. Just focus on something else. Avoid crying. I feel like crying is that visual that someone is, struggling or processing something really rough. And it's hard for so long to be told to man up, not to do that when it's a completely human thing to do. It's a natural way to calm yourself down. Your body has that reaction for a reason. So I think us realizing that that's something that you're allowed to do within this generation, even people in this chat mentioning that that's something that previously we were told not to do, is already a good sign in the right direction. That hopefully, as we have these conversations, that next generation and our generation, we can even keep letting the older generations know that it is okay to express yourself in those kinds of ways. Soft equals weak. Relax. Yeah, these are all really good, guys. I really appreciate everyone's engagement in the chat.
Likewise, I really appreciate the engagement in the chat. Let's continue it throughout the night. And Charles, you hit on it. Like one of our goals tonight is to spark cross-generational conversations. One of the things in the Black community is oftentimes within our families, within our households, there's such a gap. You have the younger generations who are more outspoken when it comes to mental health. They know a little bit more. They have language and terminology that they can use to start conversations. And then oftentimes there's a block with the older generation. So even being here tonight, Charles, I'm excited that you and I are able to represent two different generations as we lead this conversation, as we lead this webinar. And I really hope at the end of this, not only do you take some steps to personally advance your mental health, but you also continue this conversation with someone of a different generation. So before we dive deep into stigma and healing, it's important to understand some of the root causes of mistrust towards mental health systems within the Black community. And one key factor is history, from the abuse and neglect of enslaved people to most recent events like the Tuskegee syphilis study. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Black individuals have been mistreated, exploited, and ignored by medical institutions in a lot of ways. And this has created a legacy of mistrust, not just in physical health systems, but definitely in mental health services as well. On top of that, systemic racism, from unequal treatment to misdiagnosis, lack of access, continues to impact how safe or supported Black people feel when actually seeking care. For many Black men and boys, these barriers are even more pronounced, especially when combined with stereotypes that label them as dangerous, unfeeling, or emotionally disconnected. One of the things that I reflect on is as I got older and I really started to understand what mental health was, and even understanding that we all have mental health like we have physical health. And then even later, as a more advanced adult, being able to prioritize my mental health the same way I do my physical health, I reflected on like some of the things from my childhood. And I remember, growing up and seeing an older member of my family of a different generation literally go through a mental health crisis for us for such a long time. And I think many people probably have this story, but I think one of the things that really stuck with me as I was reflecting on some of those memories and things like that was like, there was just a lack of language and truly understanding. So, we say things like, oh, your cousin or your uncle is crazy, or, but we really lacked language to like differentiate a mental health need versus a physical health need. So, we grew up knowing about cancer, chemotherapy, diabetes, sugar, and things like that. That physical health, there's language to that, but that mental health, there is a lack of language across generations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the night.
So we're going to go a little bit over more of that historical context behind just like health in general and the Black community. And really quickly, I just want to throw out a question. How many of you all are familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis study? It's okay if you've never heard of it. I would even want to know that if you just want to drop in the chat, like, this is my first time, or maybe you've gone over it in class, or you've seen something about it on social media.
Yeah, I'll be very curious whether or not anyone learned about it in school.
Okay, it looks like there are a good amount of people that said yes. There's some people that said no. So we're going to go over it right now. So this study was led by the U.S. Public Health Services, and it's one of the most well-known examples of medical racism in the U.S. and is a key reason for mistrust in our healthcare system, especially among Black men. So from 1932 to 1972, the U.S. Public Health Service ran the study to observe the natural course of syphilis in Black men without ever telling them the truth or offering treatment, even after penicillin became widely available. And for those who don't know, penicillin is how you treat syphilis. So they knew how they could treat it, but they did not treat it in these Black men because they wanted to see its natural course. And a lot of these men believed that they were receiving medical care, but in reality, they were being lied to and denied treatment for decades. So that wasn't just unethical. It was dehumanizing, and it sent a clear message that Black lives and health were not valued at this moment in time. And this betrayal left a lasting impact, creating deep generational mistrust towards medical and mental health institutions, and a mistrust that still influences whether and how Black men and boys seek care today. So yeah, this is definitely an infamous study that I'm glad that a lot of you all are aware of, and I'm glad that for the people that weren't, we were able to go over this today just to give some context behind why in our community there's still that feeling of mistrust with reaching out sometimes. And then moving on, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about schizophrenia diagnosis in Black men. So in 1968, during the civil rights movement, schizophrenia was redefined in the DSM-2. And that's the book that kind of classifies mental health illnesses and how doctors and clinicians go about diagnosing and treating different mental health illnesses. And they added something that said masculinized belligerence, essentially criminalizing protest and anger in Black men. So they changed the book to kind of target that group. Psychiatrists began labeling Black men involved in activism as delusional or dangerous, framing their push for rights as a sign of mental illness. And even Black culture and political resistance, like themes of liberation and self-determination, were mischaracterized as symptoms of psychiatric disorders. This set a really dangerous precedent. Emotional expression, frustration, or activism in Black men became pathologized instead of understood. So by 2005, Black men were still being diagnosed with schizophrenia at 4 times the rate of white men, often due to misdiagnosis, bias, and cultural misunderstanding.
So Charles, you just talked about events that, we're talking about 1972, 1968, but we can go back even further. So when we think about the 1700s to 1800s, the so-called immunity hypothesis falsely claimed that enslaved Africans were immune to mental illness. The idea wasn't based on science. It was rooted in racism and the dehumanization of Black people. There was an assumption that came from the belief that enslaved people didn't have the same rights. So property ownership or the ability to vote, they didn't face the same stressors as white individuals. So in other words, no political or financial stress supposedly meant no emotional or mental distress. But of course, we know that it's the exact opposite. Enslaved Africans, their descendants endured constant trauma, violence, and oppression, yet pain was dismissed. Not only by society, but also by early mental health institutions. This is a belief that laid the foundation for long-standing stigma and neglect within Black mental health. And it created a legacy where mental health needs were either minimized or entirely ignored. Something that still echoes very prevalent today in how services are accessed and how Black men and boys are perceived when expressing emotional distress. This is one example of how historical misconceptions have had a very lasting consequence. We're talking about centuries for how mental health is viewed within and outside of the Black community. In addition, we think about 1840, the US Census falsely reported that free Black individuals experienced higher rates of mental illness than those who were enslaved. This claim was inaccurate. It was used to justify slavery, framing freedom as harmful to the Black mind. It was using natural emotional responses to racism, violence, and trauma, suggesting that seeking help or showing distress was a sign of instability. For Black men and boys, this reinforced a dangerous stigma that being emotional, being vulnerable, seeking help made them weak or unstable. And these ideas created a lasting barrier to mental health care, and we still feel those effects today. So we're talking about how history continues to show up in our day-to-day lives. It continues to affect not only older generations who have, in some cases, lived experience, but also current generations who may not even know about these things, who don't know about these things. Especially in communities where, being strong is expected and emotional expression is discouraged. So as Charles said, we went on our own journey, learning about this, doing the research to really make sure that we were ready to talk about the topic. And one of the things that really struck me was in doing so, as we were doing our research, I found a YouTube clip that really highlighted exactly all the things that Charles and I, and shout out to Shay, who also was a hand in the research portion of these workshops, we're learning. So I want to play a short clip. It's a simple news clip from Denver, Colorado. They were doing a Monday mental health spotlight. It was due in February during Black History Month. So the mental health moment in spotlight was specifically, excuse me, around the Black community. And Dr. Cheryl Ziegler, a clinical psychologist, will just kind of highlight what me and Charles said, but maybe you'll be able to understand it a little bit better.
Really what happened in 1840, they decided they were going to ask about mental health for the first time. So these U.S. Marshals went around and they were looking to ask questions specifically for freed and then unfreed African Americans. So slaves and then people who were free. And somehow what they concluded was that the African Americans who had been freed were insane and feeble-minded. They called them idiots. And so this was used for propaganda that African Americans shouldn't be freed, because if they were freed, then they would just become insane and they weren't able to make rational choices. And this has lasted for well over a century, this kind of thinking.
Were you mind blown, like when you were researching this? Were you just thinking this is wild?
Yes. And while you're getting trained to be a psychologist, you learn about institutionalization, which was a result of this. You learn about that history. But for me personally, I hadn't learned about African Americans, about immigrants, and how that specifically affected them. So yes, even for me, it sort of took my breath away.
Well, and what breaks my heart about this is there are so many people who to this day fighting systemic racism at different levels. Does this persist anywhere that we're seeing today? I mean, is this something that, unfortunately, this mindset that, like, to us seems shocking, does that persist in certain circles?
I mean, I can just speak from my world. In terms of mental health, there really was a thought not that long ago where there was a belief that maybe African Americans just didn't have the genetics to have high intellectual capabilities. So that did persist for a very long time, that notion of idiots. And so that's something that's persisted. And I think, even when we look at the NFL, we look at the Super Bowl and what a big deal it was to have two Black quarterbacks. Right? The thought was, maybe African Americans aren't bright enough to be a quarterback. That was part of that systemic racism. Even there was, they're better suited for maybe different roles. So whether you're looking at sports, whether you're looking at intellect, classroom, educational systems, absolutely, this has had lasting impacts.
This is such a bittersweet.
Really, what happened in.
So we're going to take a quick pause here and recognize how this history still affects us today. And I hope that what you all saw in the video, again, provides more of that context that we've already built, and just built a little bit more on that, understanding how institutionalization and all of that stuff has been different in the Black community than compared to other communities. But yes, let's just look at how older generations in our families and communities were often taught that mental health struggles were a sign of personal failure, not something to be named or treated. This belief created silence around emotional pain and a deep reluctance to seek professional help. Younger generations, on the other hand, are growing up with more language, awareness, and cultural shifts that encourage openness. Mental health is discussed more in schools, social media, and peer circles, but there's still a gap in how that conversation happens across the generations. And for Black boys and young men, the pressure to remain stoic, to never show fear, sadness, or that you're being overwhelmed can still be really overwhelming. And even when services are available, internalized stigma can keep them from accessing support or even sharing that support so that everyone even knows that that support exists. So we're going to take this moment to reflect and prepare to discuss a little bit more about this. Whether you want to take notes by hand, on your computer or phone, let's reflect on the impact of these historical events on our community, and then talk about the generational impact it has had and currently is having for Black males when it comes to mental health. So we'll take a little silent reflection right now, looking at these 3 questions we have, and then we'll come back and just kind of see where we're at.
Feel free to answer any of the questions in the chat as you are reflecting on the question and kind of what we've shared with you so far. I think one of the things that really stands out to me, Charles, is when we think about like influencing on different generations. I think it's one thing to be completely shut out from the mental health system, where our generation is dealing with, okay, how do I find someone who identifies, who looks like me, who understands my story a little bit better. And I think that gap again can be so prevalent. Um, if I've been completely shut out to something, I don't even know that it exists. Versus our generation, we know that it exists, and our struggle seems to be, can we find people who identify, who look like us, so that we're a little bit more comfortable in the setting, and not having to force how we show up or how we respond based on who we're receiving care from.
Exactly. I agree 100%. And I'm glad that by having these kinds of conversations, we're starting to recognize that mental health is health, but also just seeing it more on, like, instead of seeing it as black and white, seeing it more as like a grayscale. Because for so long, it seems like only if things get really serious, or for instance, if someone needs to be institutionalized, that's when they should start taking care of their mental health. But I think we realize now that you can take little steps here and there in that gray area to help your mental health without necessarily having to be on the edge of going through like a really tough time, or suffering from a really serious mental health condition.
No,
I see we're getting
absolutely.
some engagement in the chat,
Yeah,
which I hope to see.
yeah. Shout out to the people who are responding in the chat. I think a couple of things that stood out to me is, taught that crazy people seek out a therapist. And how different is that for younger generations understanding? Like, therapy is self-care. Therapy is should be a part of your overall toolkit, right? But definitely, older generations, therapy equals you're crazy, or even that, that prevalent narrative. I see, around medical models within the Black community, and then talking about theology and this idea about pray about it. Something's going on in your head, you're hearing voices, pray about it. It's the enemy kind of thing. Absolutely. Don't let folks in your business. Absolutely. Why are you sharing about what's going on? Why are you sharing that you had a bad day? That's private. You keep that to yourself. Someone else, I grew up hearing, if you pray, you'll be fine or healed or made whole, right? Where younger generations, even if faith is still at the forefront of your life, it's like, it's pray in, I have a therapist.
Finding a way to, again, like, kind of communicate with the older generation, because praying is a form of self-care. And if you're a religious person, that's your way of taking care of yourself spiritually. It's not, a lot of people have religion to do that, and it's okay to do that and have a therapist, as you said. And I think it's good for us that we're now recognizing that those two can coincide. It's not either or, and it's just opening that conversation so that you can communicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I see so many people in the chat kind of resonating with this idea of like growing up and never really having a conversation about seeking for help, or how you seek help for your mental health. And that a lot of people would see that as something is seriously wrong with you if you're in therapy or if you're seeking treatment. I think, again, that is a very prevalent narrative that a lot of people relate to. Men don't ask for help. Absolutely. It's something that I know a lot of people probably relate to. All right, again, appreciate the reflections in the chat. To those of you that reflected on your own, shout out to you as well. Thank you to those who were willing to share their personal reflections with all of us. Keep them coming.
So let's talk about the ongoing factors that shape stigma around mental health, particularly within the Black community, and especially for Black men and boys. So we're going to talk a little bit about cultural beliefs and norms, because in many Black communities, there's a strong cultural emphasis on resilience and self-reliance. These values have helped our communities survive generations of systematic oppression. So they come from a place of strength and necessity. But when it comes to mental health, these same values can sometimes backfire. The belief that you have to be strong or handle it on your own can discourage people from reaching out when they're truly struggling. For Black boys, this message starts early. They're often taught directly or indirectly that showing emotions, crying, or expressing fear makes us weak. Or as we grow up, these lessons become internalized, leading to silence and emotional pain. And again, by having this conversation, we're trying to acknowledge that so that we can move forward. And now I want to talk a little bit about stereotypes, because in broader society, Black men are often seen through the lens of harmful stereotypes portrayed as inherently strong, stoic, and invulnerable. And these stereotypes can cause people, including mental health professionals, to underestimate the emotional needs of Black men and boys. There's a dangerous assumption that they're less likely to experience mental health challenges, which simply isn't true. And I think what we also realize is that, being Black men, we're not a monolith. Like, everyone's different and everyone's unique. And I think that also plays a part into stripping away these stereotypes, understanding at the end of the day, we're humans too that deal with our mental health just like anyone else. And we're just a community that maybe needs a little bit more attention given the historical context that we went over. These misconceptions contribute to misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, or dismissal of emotional distress when Black men do seek help. So when we talk about stigma, we have to look beyond just personal attitudes. We have to examine the cultural and structural narratives that shape how Black men and boys are allowed to feel, express, and heal through these different things we go through.
Just want to let that sit for a moment. Second all of that, Charles. Thank you. So we're gonna go into we're gonna transition into kind of a game. So we're gonna play fact or myth. We're gonna share a statement, and we want you to drop in the chat whether or not you think this statement is factual or whether or not this statement is rooted in a myth or a misconception or a misunderstanding. Charles, why don't you take the first couple, and then I'll jump in at some point. All right.
Okay, sounds good. So our first one is this a fact or a myth? Black men are less likely than white men to experience mental health challenges. Let us know in the chat what you think. And again, this is a brave space. We're all here to learn. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing the answer to any of these questions, or, taking that leap to be brave and to share something, because we're just here to learn.
Yeah, there is no wrong answer. I see some answers. I see some myths, some false, acceptable answer as well. Okay, they're coming in now. All right, let's reveal.
This is a myth. Yes, that is not true. Black men experience mental health conditions at similar or higher rates, but are far less likely to seek treatment due to stigma, mistrust, and access barriers. So it's not that they're experiencing it less, it's just that they're reaching out less. And again, thank you all for this engagement in the chat. I'm loving it a lot. Okay, we're going to go on to our next one now. Is this a fact or a myth? Only 1 in 3 Black adults who need mental health care receive it.
I saw a maybe.
Yeah, that's completely fine. Okay, I see some facts coming in. You guys are correct. According to NAMI, fewer than 35% of Black adults with mental illness receive treatment, compared to nearly 50% of white adults. Okay, we'll move on to our next one. Talking about emotions openly is considered a strength in the majority of Black families. What do you all think? Is this a fact or a myth? Okay, this one I see some mixed ones. I'm starting to see a little more myths. Okay, for everyone that said myth, that is correct. Many Black boys grow up in environments where vulnerability is discouraged and strength is equated with silence. Okay, next one. Therapy and counseling are culturally irrelevant for Black men. Is this a fact or a myth? I see some people already started typing.
Yep. Majority myths coming in.
You all are correct once again. Therapy can be deeply impactful when culturally competent care is provided. Community-based and peer-led models are especially effective.
All right, fact or myth, emotional struggles among Black boys can show up as anger, not sadness. Let's see what people think. Okay, I see some true coming in. I see some fact. Yes, this is fact. Emotional suppression oftentimes can lead to anger or behavior labeled as acting out, but really oftentimes masking a deeper emotional pain, but oftentimes lacking the words or a different way to express it. Fact or myth, being strong means handling emotions on your own. What do we think? Okay, I see a myth come in. Okay, there they go. Yeah, it seems like we're getting it. Yep, this is a myth, and this is a harmful stereotype. True strength includes self-awareness, includes asking for help. It includes building emotional resilience through support. Fact or myth, suicide rates among Black youth have been rising faster than among other groups. What do we think? Is this a fact or a myth? See, okay, I see a couple answers coming in, and I see a lot of people trending in the right direction. This is a fact. The suicide rate for Black youth, particularly boys aged 10 to 19, has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry reported since 2017, suicide has been the second leading cause of death in those 10 to 19-year-olds. Rates of suicide among Black youth have risen faster than any other racial or ethnic group within the past 2 decades, with suicide rates in Black males 10 to 19 years old increasing by 60%. So anyone wondering why this topic, keep 60% in mind. In a 2024 article, the Pew Research Center reported that suicide rate among Black adolescents is increasing faster than other racial and ethnic groups. From 2007 to 2020, the suicide rate rose 144% among 10 to 17-year-olds who were Black. So I just want to take this moment. If you or someone you know needs help, please call or text the Suicide Crisis Lifeline at 988 or visit 988lifeline.org and then click on the chat button. It doesn't have to be an immediate crisis. This is something me and Charles were talking about earlier today. Maybe you just had a bad day, or maybe you want advice on how to help someone in need.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to echo that a lot. I actually work for 988, and I just want to I just echo what he said, that it's very common for people to reach out on behalf of other people, because a lot of you out there, you might not be a psychologist yourself or a psychiatrist. So if someone does confront you with, deep, heavy emotions, you can call the Lifeline on their behalf. Maybe you're even with them. Maybe you're in the same room with them and they're not willing to call, but you can say, hey, I just want to call just so I can find a way to help you. Or let's say maybe they're in a different state. Maybe they texted you something you're concerned about. You can reach out. And again, as Tyrrell mentioned, you can reach out on your own behalf, even if you are not at the point where you think you would need to call the hotline. Maybe you tried to call your mom that day and she didn't answer and you're really freaking out. That's what the hotline's for, to help you when you're at that spot. We also really want to help those people that are, really far, and we need to try to help them immediately. But there's so many people that call in every single day that just, need someone to listen and help them through their unique mental health situation. So please keep that number in mind, either for yourself or for your family or for your friends, and continue to have that conversation about this line with your families, because sometimes people will call in and even say things like, my brother told me about this line, or my mom kept telling me to, use this in case I needed it, or a friend gave it to me. So it's important to keep these things, to keep talking about these resources so that everyone in our community and those people that we love know that these resources exist.
Absolutely. And as other people are dropping it in the chat, you can text or call that 988 number.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we're going to zoom out and look at the bigger picture on how past systems of oppression continue to shape the emotional and mental health of Black communities today. So I want to kind of go over the definition of historical trauma. Historical trauma is not just about one singular event. It's about the cumulative emotional and psychological wounds that are passed down through generations as a result of systemic racism, slavery, segregation, and ongoing discrimination. For Black Americans, this includes centuries of being dehumanized, criminalized, and denied access to safety, autonomy, and mental health resources. These traumas weren't just physical. They affected how people were allowed to feel, how they were treated when they struggled, and how emotions were expressed or suppressed over time. So we want to go over our core idea that this trauma doesn't stay in the past. It lives in our bodies, families, and communities. And it shows up as increased vulnerability to anxiety, depression, and PTSD, distrust of healthcare systems, silence around emotions, internalized beliefs that needing help is weakness. And for Black men and boys, this can be even more complex. Historical trauma intersects with harmful masculinity norms, and it makes it even harder to name or process what's being carried across generations.
So we know that history continues to influence our daily lives and experiences, but particularly for us Black men, why is it so hard for us to talk to each other? Why aren't fathers talking to sons, grandfathers talking to grandchildren, uncles talking to their nephews, etc.? There are barriers to communication. So one of them is generational blame and guilt. A lot of us blame our parents or grandparents, etc., for not giving us what we needed besides food and shelter. For many of us, like myself, we grew up without a dad and believed that we were missing out on something. However, I want to free us tonight. I want to offer freedom and a place to start healing. So whether they were there every day or no day, it's impossible to teach what you don't know yourself. For the older generations that carry guilt, that tricks us into thinking it's too late to address it or fix it, it is not. We've talked a little bit about this, cultural suppression and feelings. Black men, young boys often internalize messages that show vulnerability equals weakness. Public personas are built to mask fear and insecurity. Strategies shaped by historical trauma and ongoing societal pressures. There's a lack of safe emotional spaces. There are a few places where Black boys and men can really express themselves freely. The majority of us happens only once in a haircut, when the barbershop conversation hits a little bit different. Without emotional outlets, feelings often emerge destructively. And we talked about this through aggression, substance abuse, or even suicidal behavior. There's a lack of shared language. Oftentimes the gap between Black men of different generations is so large, we feel like we're speaking different languages. You got your 40 and younger group. We're growing up who know about mental health on a deeper level. We may be in therapy as a best practice, not just because something is wrong, compared to 40 plus who not have, like the majority, have a hard time even recognizing that we all have mental health. To say that we all have mental health may bring up conflict. And then there's the historical and societal roots that we mentioned earlier, from slavery to modern day oppression. Black men have systemically been denied emotional legitimacy, and their cultural stereotypes that portray us as monstrous and reinforces silence when it comes to mental health and when it comes to our emotional needs. So as a result of these barriers, Black men and boys bottle their emotions because we suffer from emotional illiteracy. Emotional literacy in simple terms is difficulty in recognizing, understanding, and expressing and managing one's own emotions, as well as the emotions of others. And it can lead to problems in interpersonal relationships, emotional regulation, and just overall negatively affect mental well-being. So we want to think about, okay, what does it mean and how does it show up? So recognizing emotions, having a hard time noticing or naming emotions that you're experiencing, not having a language, understanding or lack of understanding emotions, finding it challenging to grasp the details of emotions or understand what's really causing them, expressing emotions, struggling to clearly or appropriately share your feelings with others, managing emotions, difficulty handling emotions, reactions, or keeping them in check, and then empathy, struggling to relate to or connect with how someone else is feeling. So I want to share a story that is not mine, but it is in a TED Talk published on YouTube by Nate Evans Jr. He shares about how mental health and communication for Black men and boys. More importantly, he articulates how we can counter the barriers that we just discussed through emotional fluency. And in the clip, he talks about he talks about his emotional tipping point. He gives context around the death of his grandfather. So we're going to pick up towards the end of that story, and he's going to talk about the consequences of emotional bottling and how he eventually developed emotional fluency through connection with other Black men.
So in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, you're going to give him some antibiotics. Okay, he'll be home on what day? I wasn't thinking the worst. He continued to talk and he said, the gangrene is progressive and there's nothing we can do to stop it or slow it down. You may want to say your goodbyes. And in a moment, I watched Superman literally disappear in the kryptonite bed right before my eyes with my brother and my father. And this would be my emotional breaking point because we all have one, especially our Black boys. And for me, shortly after his passing, I would go into a deep depression and I would start suffering from severe anxiety. Now, I actually still went down to school in Memphis, Tennessee, but I dropped out after the first semester. I would end up going to 4 other colleges after that, while battling with suicidal ideations and the unwarranted pressures that Black men face in America that causes us to become martyrs to our masculinity. Now, while my pop-up's passing was ultimately that tipping point, that breaking point for me, it wasn't what pushed me up the proverbial ladder of emotional destruction. I was a ticking time bomb, like most of our Black boys are today. And if it wasn't his passing that pushed me over the edge, it would have been the next traumatic event. Literally, it would have been the next traumatic event. It's interesting because when you shake a soda can, you can't really tell if it has been shaken until you open the top and it explodes everywhere. In the same way, you can never really tell if the Black boy has been shaken, emotionally abused, or traumatized until some type of event happens and then his top is open and he too explodes everywhere. See, without the language of emotional fluency and safe spaces to cultivate that in, Black boys and men are merely just big toddlers. See, toddlers lack the comprehension to express how they feel and what they need. They literally just cry or scream. Some of them might even say mama or dada repeatedly. And it's up to us as the parents to understand that need and address that need. But here's the thing, for Black boys and men, those cries are rarely ever tears. Instead, they come off as embracive behaviors, acts of violence, drug abuse, and in worst cases, suicide. In the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry, an article titled "Boys Don't Cry, Addressing the Unmet Needs of African American Boys," it states that African American communities are lacking safe spaces for Black boys to express their emotions. And they're also lacking mentor groups as well. Just imagine, right? You're a young Black boy, you're being exposed to violence, you're being exposed to racism as well as white supremacy, and then you're also seeing Black males be murdered on a loop that plays on every social media platform that you log on to. See, safe spaces and the language of emotional fluency is a necessity for us to survive. So Nate, how did you become emotionally fluent? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I know you want to know, right? While in the posture of running from my own emotional trauma, I found myself in my bedroom in the dark, contemplating and wondering if this would be the day that I would end it all. These were my thoughts, right? I was 3 colleges down. I just had lost a close friend to suicide and another one to prison. I was flat broke, and me and my family were on the verge of being evicted from our home. Now, looking back, I realized that I didn't necessarily want to die. I just wanted to kill the pain. And my best friend, he noticed that something was off with me. He noticed it, he sensed it, right? That's what best friends are for. And saying I'm good wasn't good enough for him to leave me alone. So in the act of love and compassion, he said, look, you need to get out of the house. I'm gonna take you to the gym with me. He took me to the gym, and when we got to the gym, he introduced me to 2 other Black men, and they invited me into their brotherhood. So we started training and working out 5 to 6 days a week. But before we would work out, we would sit in that locker room for about 30 to 45 minutes and just talk and fellowship. And what I was exposed to in that locker room, it changed my life forever. I was exposed to men, not even just men, I was exposed to Black men being vulnerable and transparent, sharing what they were going through and how they were getting through it. And I don't know if they intentionally did this at all, but those men, they created a safe space for me to feel seen and heard without the fear of judgment. Tony Robbins actually has a quote on that, and he said,
So Nate really highlights the power of developing emotional fluency. So learning emotional labels empowers conscious regulation. So I feel hurt versus I'm an angry person. Naming emotions equals claiming control over them and opening up communication channels for those who care about you and who honestly want to be there for you. Safe spaces equal healing spaces. Real change starts when Black boys and men are given permission to feel in environments that are judgment-free. We need trusted mentors, peers, even therapists. So if you're struggling with how to create a safe space for yourself or the Black men, the Black boys in your life, later on in this TED Talk, and I encourage you to watch it in full. It's on YouTube. Nate offers some criteria around creating safe spaces for Black men and boys that can be applied to anybody. So start with love, approach them with an open heart, offer to listen without interruption, validate their feelings as they are shared, and then encourage them not to just overcome, but to continue to share when needed. Sounds very simple, but can be game-changing for somebody in need. Emotional communities foster trust, vulnerability, leading to healthier relationships and resilience. Encouraging vulnerability as a strength is a key mindset in this process. And Nate reframes vulnerability not as a flaw, but as a sign of courage. So some key takeaways: education. We got to teach emotional vocabulary early. We got to create those safe spaces, integrate emotional literacy in our homes, in our schools, in our places of worships, in those mentorship programs that our young men are in. The environment, create a safe space, a non-judgmental space in your home, community centers, peer support for true emotional expression. And then reframe strength, normalize open sharing, highlight emotional expression as a powerful, expansive kind of strength. Collective healing, emotional fluency isn't an individual upgrade, it's a community transformation. So start with small, honest conversations, and then intervention and support. We got to equip our fathers, our mentors, our educators with the tools so that they're able to lead by example and model vulnerability for the younger generation. So our core idea here is breaking the emotional silence. It frees us. It helps dismantle intergenerational trauma, and it builds healthier communities. All right, Charles, I'm gonna throw it to you to talk about our resource.
Yeah, so in the chat or here soon, we're going to be dropping downloadable reflections. So it's a handout that you all can download and look at on your own time, and even share with someone from a different generation, or maybe other people in your Active Minds group if you're currently in Active Minds group, or just someone who might be interested in this to continue those conversations with these questions that we have here. So I want to give us a minute to kind of look at them before we move into the next part. Thank you, Tyrrell, for.
Yeah, really quick, that should be a public link. You should be able to access that resource. If for some reason you're having a hard time accessing it, we will make sure that when we email you following this workshop, that we have a public access version. We'll also attach the PDF for you to use. Throwing it back to you, Charles. Go ahead.
Yes, and Tyrrell, quick question. If someone is watching this recording, maybe on YouTube, how can they access this? Where can they go to find it?
That's a very, very good question. We can link it onto YouTube, and then we'll also, once we get this recording up on our Your Voice is Your Power Hub, we'll see about attaching this document as well.
Thank you. And this could be a good resource moving forward whenever people want to start those conversations about mental health in the Black community.
Absolutely. And as Charles named, that first set of questions is more a personal reflection. And then once we get into that second set, we're thinking about that generational conversation and including others.